So I think what we'll start off by doing, we'll just show you the outline of what we have for this session. So we've structured it in such a way that we'll first of all look at the objectives of the session in terms of what is it that we hope to achieve by the end of the session. And then also, what is it that we hope to achieve by the end of the symposium, which means by the end of the week in terms of further interactions going forward. The other aspect that is there is that some of you may be new to material science. So we also try to give you a basic understanding of what material science is all about. So at least whatever comes afterwards, at least you will have a better understanding. And then the third point, I think what I can say about this one is also in line with what Sosina mentioned just now, that I'm involved with the African MRS. So something that maybe some of you may not know is that the African MRS was formed as a result of a workshop that took place some 20 years ago. It was an initiative that was supported by the US NSF, where the whole idea was to bring together the US and Africa in the form of a workshop to come together and discuss ways of collaborating in materials research. So that developed further to go beyond a group of people to what is now the African Materials Research Society. So I think I'll just highlight maybe just one example that shows the importance of having strategic partnerships to be able to develop material science on the continent and globally. And then the last part, we'll introduce the 4 speakers that we have for this session. Okay, so in terms of the objectives, so to help people understand better material science and also to understand better the applications, what we have for the 4 talks, we have the speakers looking at different applications of materials research. So we have construction materials, we have energy materials, we have biomaterials, and also have a device fabrication that is involved. So our hope is that through that diverse approach in terms of the presentations, it will help you to understand better how exactly material science has resulted in the transformation of the different sectors in science and technology. And also, hopefully, you can also be able to see from there how going forward, these different applications can eventually contribute to the development of Africa, the US, and globally. So that's what we have in terms of that structure. The other aspect that is also there, obviously, it's 50-50. We have the US participants and the participants from Africa. So we are looking at how we can have the 2 groups of people complementing each other, bringing on the table what is it that they have. Like in Africa, we talk about abundant resources. So how can that contribute to the development of material science, and how can we then have linkages between the 2 categories of research that we have in there. So we're going to look at that as well and see how that comes through. The other thing that is also there that we also want to highlight is that nanotechnology specifically is something that we see as making a contribution towards the development going forward in material science and different sectors. So what we have is that for all the talks, as much as they're going to focus on construction materials, energy materials, biomaterials, and the device fabrication, each of them have got a component of nanotechnology. So you'll be able to see how nanotechnology can be applied in the different areas. So that will also help with understanding. Obviously, we can't cover everything, but we're hoping that I think those examples will help you to understand better what it is what we're looking at and our thinking. And then the last part is the one of the linkages with the 5 themes that we have. So we put material science in the center. So our hope is that I think earlier on there was the discussion about artificial intelligence, how it can be useful. I think some were saying that probably we don't have to force things. If it's not really applicable, maybe you don't really have to talk about AI. But I think our hope is that you'll be able to see from all the presentations and discussions how material science can link up with all the areas. And I think from what I've been reading some other publications, indeed AI is linked to material science. It can help in different ways. So hoping that those things will come out from this. So I think this is what we have in terms of our objectives. I'll just hand over to Luyi to just say.
Well, thanks a lot, Sam.
Yeah.
And well, I think for materials research, we always claim that processing, structure, properties, and performance are the 4 core components for our research. And in this session, you will find that we have 4 amazing talks. We will integrate both material science, focusing on fundamental science, and also materials engineering, more focusing on applications, to work together, drive innovation in research, in industry, and to bring to new products to change our life.
Okay, so I'll just highlight the example that I mentioned, where we have a very good partnership that came up as a result of the African MRS and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So what happened was that around the 2020, towards the last quarter of 2020, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, they were interested in ways of promoting nanotechnology on the continent. So they were looking for a suitable partner. So they approached African MRS because I think they knew about the work that we've been doing. We were looking at how in different ways we can promote excellence in all aspects of materials research. So we went into a partnership. Initially, I think it was funding for about a year, and specifically looking at nanotechnology. And as expected, we had to focus on specific areas. So I think in terms of the SDGs, we're focusing on 4 areas: nanotech for health, energy, water, and agriculture. So that's what we looked at initially, specifically looking at how we can be able to support specifically the scientific research. But then I think what then happened afterwards, it then opened up to expand to other areas. Because what happened was that initially we're looking at how through that agreement, we could look at also ways of supporting research, although the funding was not significant. But then I think it also helped. In some cases, you find that people were getting about maybe $15,000, which was, even though it was on a small scale, but it helped to be able to achieve some objectives. So what happened with that was that we ended up getting involved in other things besides specifically looking at the scientific research component. We were now involved because we're not looking at it from the holistic point of view. Nanotechnology policy, there was also nanotechnology education we see in the next slide. We're also involved in making contributions to nanotechnology entrepreneurship. But then I think from our perspective as the African MRS, we're looking at this from the material science point of view, how all these initiatives can link up to material science as a whole. So where we are now, we are almost wrapping up the write-up for the activities that we're involved in. So what I will do is that in the next 2 slides, I'll just highlight just one aspect that I think is important for sustainable growth of material science, and also something that has also shown our interaction as US and Africa for the development of materials research. So one of the things that I think from all the interactions, one thing that kept on coming up was the limitation of resources, particularly looking at graduate students, where you find that there's a challenge of scholarships, there's a challenge of access to equipment and resources that are required for doing research. So what we came up with, it involves a number of institutions. You can see AS is there, UNESCO is there, African MRS. So ECA, of course, UNECA is also there. I think Achana will highlight some of that work that we did on this. So in summary, what this is all about is to ensure that the whole continent, everyone has got access to education. So what we were thinking at the time was that we can have a system whereby we can have online lectures so that you can be able to benefit from wherever you are in the 5 regions of Africa. And then from there, we then look at how we can be able to access the research facilities from the different labs that we have in Africa. And I think you'll see from the next slide that we've also made efforts to try and link up some labs that are in Africa and some labs that are in the US, so that where we are limited in Africa, students can also benefit from the US. So in a way, this is something that is practical that we've been working on. Right now, I think you can see funding in bold there. We're at a stage where once we've been able to finalize the funding that is required for this, we'll be able to implement. But otherwise, the curriculum has been developed. It has been evaluated. Right now, I think it's, at the last time when I was talking to UNECA, they were translating it to French and other languages. So at least everyone can be able to access that. So once the funding is in place, then we'll be able to implement. So I'm hoping that hopefully maybe by next year, we can have this thing running. So in terms of what this has done, which in a way it overlaps with what we're trying to do here, where we're trying to create an environment for networking. There are centers that have been identified in Africa that have got good facilities. So some of the speakers that are going to give their talks, they come from some of the centers. Of course, me, I come from Botswana. So you can see Beatrice there. Achana from Mauritius, you can see Mauritius is there. So what we have, I think on the right, although it's not part of what is in Africa, on the right, you can see Northwestern University. That is where Angie comes from. But then it wasn't directly linked in terms of what she'll be doing, but just to show you that we've already did some links. So some of these things came up as a result of the linkages that we were having with UNECA, because we had a number of events where we were having people from all over the world that are getting involved. So besides the US, we also have some other institutions that are there. So some of these things, I think they are quite interesting in the sense that, like earlier when we were talking with some colleagues about agriculture, we're looking at preservation. So some of the things that the team from the Connecticut Agriculture Experimentation do, they look at the application of nanotechnology in agriculture. So preservation is something that they're also looking at. I think we talked about that earlier on. So just to highlight some of the things that have been coming up, I won't talk about a lot of things, but just to show you that from some of the things that we've been doing, it's very important to make sure that there's a platform for bringing people together so people can be able to share ideas, and then you can then collaborate on specific things and then work together going forward. So I think I'll just stop there.
Okay, well, I think we really can't wait, but we would like to introduce our 4 amazing speakers. Achana from Mauritius, Deji from Texas, Austin, Angie from Northwestern, and Bala from Senegal. So
now we'll move on to our first speaker for this session, who's our lead speaker. That's Professor Achana Bao Luximon.